The stranger's words hit Jake Morrison like a lightning bolt to the chest, stealing his breath and dropping his hat to the dusty ground outside the church. Sarah, radiant in her white dress just moments before, now stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet trembling in her hands as color drained from her face. "She's carrying my baby," the dark-haired man repeated, louder this time so every soul in Redemption Creek could hear, "and I've come to claim what's mine." Jake had waited 3 years to marry Sarah Mitchell, 3 long years of courtship, of building a ranch worthy of her, of saving every dollar to give her the life she deserved. The church was packed with their friends and family. The preacher's Bible was open to the sacred vows, and Sarah's father had just placed her hand in his, with tears of joy in his eyes. Now everything crumbled like sand. The stranger stepped forward from the back of the church, his spurs ringing against the wooden floor with each deliberate step. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, with the kind of confidence that came from money and privilege. Nothing like the dusty cowboys and ranchers who made up Redemption Creek's population. "My name is Marcus Whitmore," he announced, his Eastern accent cutting through the stunned silence. "Sarah and I were acquainted during her visit to Denver last winter." Jake's mind reeled. Sarah had gone to Denver to care for her sick aunt, stayed 3 months while the old woman recovered from pneumonia. She'd written him letters every week, sweet words about missing him and counting the days until her return. Never once mentioned meeting anyone else. "Sarah?" Jake's voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. She looked at him with eyes full of tears and something that might have been shame. Her free hand moved unconsciously to her belly, and Jake felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. I can sure. Plain, she whispered. "No need for explanations," Marcus Whitmore said smoothly. "The facts speak plainly enough. The child is mine, conceived during our passionate winter together. I've come to do the honorable thing and marry the mother of my child." Murmurs rippled through the congregation like wildfire. Sarah's mother gasped audibly. Her father's face went red as a sunset, torn between rage and humiliation. Jake stared at the woman he'd planned to spend his life with, searching her face for denial, for any sign that this was all some terrible mistake. Instead, he saw truth in her tear-filled eyes. The church erupted in whispered conversations and shocked exclamations. The preacher cleared his throat nervously, unsure how to proceed with a wedding that had suddenly become something else entirely. And in the midst of it all, Jake Morrison's carefully constructed world collapsed around him like a house of cards in a windstorm. "Is it true?" Jake asked quietly, stepping closer to Sarah despite the crowd of shocked witnesses. His hat lay forgotten in the dust as he searched her face for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Sarah's tears fell freely now, staining the bodice of her wedding dress. "Jake, it's not what you think. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Marcus Whitmore laughed, a sound like silver coins dropping on marble. "There's nothing complicated about it. We shared a bed for 2 months in Denver. The child she carries is mine by blood and by right." "That's enough!" Sarah's father, Thomas Mitchell, stepped forward with his fists clenched. "You'll not speak of my daughter that way in God's house. Your daughter came to me willingly, old man. Ask her yourself." All eyes turned to Sarah, who stood trembling at the altar like a deer caught between hunters. Jake could see the war being fought behind her eyes. Shame, fear, and something else he couldn't. "Name. Tell them it's a lie, Sarah," Jake said softly. "Tell them this man is trying to ruin our wedding for some twisted reason." Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came. The silence stretched, unbearably, until Marcus Whitmore pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket. "Perhaps this will clarify matters," he said, unfolding what looked like Sarah's familiar handwriting. "A letter she sent me just last month, confirming her condition and begging me to come for her." "No," Sarah whispered, reaching for the letter. "You weren't supposed to. I never meant." Jake felt the ground shift beneath his feet as he realized what he was hearing. Sarah hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd written to her lover, had been planning this deception, even as she stood at the altar with Jake. "Read it aloud," someone called from the congregation. Jake couldn't see who, but the voice carried the kind of mob hunger that came when scandal struck a small town. "That won't be necessary," the preacher said firmly. "This is still God's house, and we'll conduct ourselves with dignity." "Dignity?" Jake's voice cracked as he turned to face the congregation. These were his friends, his neighbors, people he'd known his whole life. Now they stared at him with pity and morbid curiosity, waiting to see how the jilted groom would handle his humiliation. "Sarah," he said, turning back to the woman he'd loved for 3 years, "just tell me the truth. Is the baby his?" She looked at him with such anguish that for a moment he thought she might deny it all, might say the stranger was lying, and beg Jake to marry her anyway. He would have, God help him. Even knowing what he knew, he would have taken her and raised another man's child as his own. But Sarah Mitchell had always been honest, even when the truth hurt. "Yes," she whispered, "the baby is his." The church erupted in gasps and murmurs. Jake stood frozen as the woman he had built his entire future around confirmed his worst fear. Marcus Whitmore smiled triumphantly and stepped toward the altar. "Then it's settled," he said. "Sarah, gather you. Our things. We'll be married by week's end in Denver, where my family can welcome you properly." "Now hold on just a minute," Thomas Mitchell growled. "My daughter's not going anywhere with some stranger who shows up making claims. I'm no stranger. I'm the father of her child. That gives me rights." Jake watched this exchange as if from a great distance, his mind struggling to process the destruction of everything he'd held dear. Then, slowly, a cold clarity settled over him. He bent down and picked up his hat, dusting it off with deliberate care. When he looked up, his face was set like stone. "No," he said quietly. The single word cut through the chaos like a blade. Every eye in the church turned to Jake, who stood with his hat in his hands and murder in his eyes. "No?" Marcus Whitmore arched an eyebrow. "I'm afraid you don't have a say in this matter, Boy. The woman belongs with the father of her child." "The woman has a name," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "And she doesn't belong to anyone." "Jake, please," Sarah whispered. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder?" Jake's laugh was bitter as alkali water. "Lady, you just stood at the altar in a wedding dress and let me find out you're carrying another man's baby. I'd say we're already past hard and well into impossible." Marcus Whitmore's hand moved casually to rest on the pearl handle of an expensive pistol at his hip. "Stand aside, ranch hand. This doesn't concern you anymore." "Everything about Sarah concerns me." Jake's own gun hung heavy on his hip, a working man's Colt that had seen its share of trouble. "And I don't much like your tone, stranger." The tension in the church ratcheted up like a rope being twisted too tight. Women gathered their children closer. Men shifted nervously, hands moving instinctively toward their own weapons. Even the preacher stepped back from the altar, rebel, cognizing the signs of violence about to unfold. "Gentlemen, please," Thomas Mitchell tried to intervene. "This is a house of worship." "Your daughter made her choice when she spread her legs for a rich man in Denver," Marcus said coldly. "Now she lives with the consequences." Jake's fist connected with Marcus Whitmore's jaw before anyone could blink, sending the Easterner stumbling backward into a pew. The congregation scattered like startled birds, screaming and pushing toward the exits. "You son of a bitch!" Jake snarled, advancing on the fallen man. "Talk about her that way again, and I'll kill you where you stand." Marcus spat blood and came up with his pistol drawn. "You just made the biggest mistake of your worthless life, cowboy." "Stop!" Sarah stepped between them, her wedding dress billowing around her like a white flake of surrender. "Stop it, both of you! This is madness!" "Get out of the way, Sarah," Jake said without taking his eyes off Marcus. "This is between him and me now." "The hell it is. I'm the one who caused this. I'm the one who—" She stopped, one hand pressed to her belly, the other reaching toward Jake as if to bridge the impossible distance between them. "Who lied to me for months?" Jake finished. "Who let me plan a future that was built on nothing but deception?" Marcus kept his gun trained on Jake over Sarah's shoulder. "She chose me, ranch hand. Deal with it like a man." "Chose you?" Jake's voice was raw with pain and rage. "Or chose your money, your fancy clothes, and Eastern promises?" For the first time, Marcus Whitmore's confidence flickered. "What are you implying?" Jake looked at Sarah, seeing her clearly for maybe the first time in 3 years. The way she clutched her belly protectively, the fear in her eyes that went deeper than worry about violence between two men. The letter Marcus had threatened to read aloud. "Sarah," Jake said quietly, "what did you write in that letter?" "We." "At were you begging him for?" Her face went white as her dress. Marcus raised his gun a little higher. "Nothing that concerns you anymore," he said. But Jake was reading Sarah's expression like a book written in a language he'd only just learned. "You didn't ask him to come for you, did you? You asked him for something else, something he's not telling us." The last of the congregation fled the church, leaving only the preacher cowering behind his pulpit, and the three of them locked in a triangle of deception, desperation, and deadly intentions. "Tell me, Sarah," Jake said. "Tell me what you really wrote." Sarah's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she stood between the two men, her wedding dress now seeming like a costume from some cruel play. The empty church echoed with her ragged breathing and the tick of the old clock above the altar. "I wrote," she began, then stopped, looking at Marcus with something that might have been hatred. "I wrote asking for money, for help with the baby. I never asked you to come here." Marcus Whitmore's face darkened. "Careful, my dear. You wouldn't want to say something you'll regret." "Regret?" Sarah's voice grew stronger. "I regret Denver. I regret every moment I spent believing your lies about loving me, about taking care of me and the baby." Jake lowered his gun slightly, pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. "What lies, Sarah?" "He promised me marriage in Denver, said we'd have a beautiful life together, that his family would welcome me." Fresh tears streamed down her face. "But when I told him about the baby, everything changed. Suddenly I was just some cowgirl who'd thrown herself at him, someone to be paid off and forgotten." "That's not," Marcus started. "You told me to get rid of it," Sarah continued, her voice growing fierce. "Said a child would complicate things. When I refused, you threw me out of your hotel room and told me never to contact you again." Jake felt something shift in his chest, rage mixing with a pain so deep it threatened to drown him. "But you did contact him." "I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't tell you the truth, couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes. So I wrote to him, begged him to at least help with expenses, for the baby's sake." Marcus kept his gun raised, but his confidence was cracking like ice in spring. "She's lying, making up stories to turn you against me." "Am I?" Sarah reached into her bodice and pulled out a crumpled telegram. "Show them what you really came here for, Marcus. Show them the telegram you sent in response to my letter." "Sarah, don't," Marcus warned, but she was already unfolding the paper. "We'll pay $2,000 for silence," she read aloud. "Come alone to settle this quietly. No one else need know. You didn't come here to marry me or claim your child. You came here to buy my silence and make sure your rich Eastern family never finds out about your bastard baby." Jake's world shifted again, but this time towards something that might have been understanding. Sarah hadn't betrayed him for love. She'd made a terrible mistake and then compounded it with desperation and shame. $2,000 is more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes out here, Marcus said, his voice taking on a wheeling tone. "Enough to disappear, start over somewhere else. Why throw that away for some cowboy who'll never be able to give you what I can?" "Because," Sarah said, turning to face Jake with her heart in her eyes, "he would have loved this baby. Would have raised it as his own and never made me feel ashamed of my mistakes. Because he's 10 times the man you'll ever be." Jake felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door he'd thought was locked, forever suddenly revealing light on the other side. "Sarah," he said quietly, holstering his gun despite Marcus still holding his weapon, "why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" "Because I was scared. Because I thought I'd lost you forever and couldn't bear to watch you walk away." She pressed both hands to her belly. "This baby needs a father, Jake. A real father. And I need you." Marcus Whitmore watched this exchange with growing panic. "You can't seriously be considering taking her back. She's carrying another man's child." Jake looked at the woman he'd loved for 3 years, seeing her clearly now, not perfect, not innocent, but real and flawed and human. Then he looked at Marcus Whitmore, with his expensive clothes and cheap morals. "You're right," Jake said finally. "She is carrying another man's child." Sarah's face crumpled. "But that man," Jake continued, "is nothing but a coward who abandons women and tries to buy his way out of responsibility, which means this baby needs someone better, someone who will teach it right from wrong and how to face consequences with honor." He stepped closer to Sarah, close enough to smell the orange blossoms in her hair. "Question is," he said softly, "are you willing to face those consequences with me?" Sarah's answer came not in words, but in the way she reached for Jake's hand, her fingers intertwining with his, like they'd never been apart. Marcus Whitmore's face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "You're both fools," he snarled. "That money would have solved everything. Now you'll have nothing but shame and another man's bastard." Jake's free hand moved to his gun again, but Sarah squeezed his fingers. "He's not worth it," she said quiet. Lie? Let him go back to Denver with his guilt and his secrets. That's punishment enough. Is it? Marcus laughed bitterly. You think I'll let you destroy my reputation with some sordid story about hotel rooms and abandoned children? I think, came a new voice from the church doorway, that you'll do exactly that. They turned to see Sheriff Ben Hartley standing in the entrance, his badge catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Behind him stood several townsmen, their faces grim with purpose. Sheriff, Marcus said, quickly holstering his weapon and straightening his coat. Perfect timing. These people are trying to extort money from me with false claims and forged documents. That so? Sheriff Hartley walked slowly down the aisle, his boots echoing in the empty church. Funny thing about that telegram the lady read aloud. Jimmy Watson over at the telegraph office, he keeps copies of everything that comes through. Legal requirement, you understand. Marcus went pale. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm saying outright that you sent a telegram offering to pay a woman for her silence. In most places, that's called extortion or bribery, depending on how you want to look at it. The sheriff stopped a few feet away, close enough that Marcus had to look up to meet his eyes. Either way, it's illegal. You have no jurisdiction over my business dealings. Maybe not, but I do have jurisdiction over men who draw guns in churches and threaten the peace. Sheriff Hartley's hand rested casually on his own weapon. Seems to me you've got two choices, Mr. Whitmore. You can climb on your fancy horse and ride back to Denver, never to darken our town again. Or you can stay and explain to a judge why you think buying silence about abandoned children is good business practice. Marcus looked around the church, taking in the hostile faces of the townsmen, the sheriff's steely determination, and Sarah's unwavering grip on Jake's hand. His shoulders sagged in defeat. This isn't over, he said, but the words carried no weight. Yes, it is, Sarah replied. Go home, Marcus. Find some other woman to charm and abandon. We're done here. Marcus Whitmore straightened his coat one final time, shot a look of pure hatred at Jake, and stalked out of the church. They heard his horse's hooves pounding away toward the main road, carrying him back to whatever hollow life awaited him in Denver. Sheriff Hartley tipped his hat to Sarah. Ma'am, sorry your wedding got interrupted by that unpleasantness. It's not interrupted, Jake said, looking at the preacher who was still cowering behind his pulpit. Just delayed a few minutes. Reverend Peters, you ready to finish what we started? The old preacher blinked in confusion. But the circumstances have changed. Not the important ones. Jake turned to Sarah, his calloused hands gentle as they cupped her face. I love you. You love me. Everything else is just details we'll figure out together. The baby, we'll have a father who chooses to be there every day. We'll have a name and a home and all the love two parents can give. Jake's voice was steady as bedrock. If you'll have me, knowing what we're both getting into. Sarah's answer was a kiss that tasted of tears and hope and new beginnings. 6 months later, when little Emma Morrison was born with her mother's dark eyes and a stranger's nose, Jake held her like she was made of spun gold. The town gossips had plenty to say about timing and propriety, but they said it quietly. Jake Morrison was known to have strong opinions about people who spoke ill of his wife and daughter. 3 years after that, when Emma spoke her first word, Daddy, while reaching for Jake with chubby fingers, Sarah watched from the kitchen window and touched the simple wedding ring he'd placed on her finger in that church amid chaos and revelation. Some marriages were built on pristine beginnings and perfect timing. Theirs was built on forgiveness, second chances, and the choice to love someone not in spite of their mistakes, but through them. And in the golden light of another Colorado sunset, with her husband teaching her, daughter to ride and laughter floating across their small ranch, Sarah Morrison knew that sometimes the most beautiful stories began with the worst days. The heart, she'd learned, was big enough to hold both truth and grace, and that was more than enough.